Hey, want to see a very clear look at racism and gender identity on the far regressive left? Stay tuned. So, over the weekend, my family went out to WonderCon, which, for people not in the know, is a comic book media convention held in Anaheim, California every year around Easter. It's really kind of too bad that it hasn't been held on Easter for a couple of years, because watching people come up with creative costumes and take on the religious fanatics who want to scream at all of us heathens who are just at a convention and not in church, that's just hysterical. Of course, these sign-carrying idiots aren't in church either, so there is that. But at conventions, there are panels where people give presentations on various subjects of interest, usually on writing or artwork or TV shows or movies or whatever. They can be a lot of fun if you're into that kind of thing. Now, my wife occasionally writes for an educational website, which means every year I get to sit through one or two panels on educational subjects. Usually, they're not too bad, but this year I got to sit through one called A Very Special Episode, Lessons in Kids Comics, and it was clear from the outset that this was going to be an SJW disaster. The people giving the talk were all far leftist regressives who, as became painfully obvious as time went on, were fanatical identitarians. Yeah, if that sounds like somewhere you don't want to be, you're absolutely right. But this also turned out to be a perfect example of the kind of racism that I talk about from the far left all the time. So I'm just going to hit the highlights here and start with two of them that were the absolute worst. Nidhi Janani is an artist that was born in India and raised in California. She is a blatant racist, focusing almost entirely on all things India. She's not at all embarrassed to say so either. In fact, during the panel, she said the one thing that ensured that I was going to make this video that, and I quote, "I just want to write about brown people." All she cares about is skin color. In fact, she said that in the future, she wants to expand from doing just Indian stories to doing Muslim stories, because most Muslims are brown. And she tells this really stupid story of some Indian mother coming up to her at a convention and saying that her daughter was really interested in getting into writing or drawing comics, and Nidhi, as an Indian woman, proved that you could do it. Well, of course you can do it, but your skin color has nothing at all to do with your ability as an artist or as a writer. But no, we have to keep pushing the racist narrative that skin color is all that matters and that you have to think of yourself only in terms of your skin color, and if there's ever anything that you can't achieve, then clearly it's racism to blame. It couldn't possibly be that you're a terrible artist or that you couldn't write your way out of a wet paper bag. It's racism! And then you get Kat Staggs, who's a lesbian artist who's worked on The Adventures of Supergirl and Wonder Woman for DC, among many other things. And she made damn sure everyone knew she was gay. It was one of the first things out of her mouth, because apparently her sexuality is what everybody in the audience really cares about, right? And then she goes on to explain that she and her wife have a daughter, and it's such a terrible thing that out of all of the books that her young daughter has, only two of them feature a plot where there are two mommies. Why? Because she's a lesbian crusader, of course. And while we're talking about it, there was also Mariko Tamaki, who got to play a dual role of being Asian and lesbian. And not only did she jump in and agree with Kat Staggs on a lot of gay comics, etc., but she also pushed hard for more Asian stories in comics, crying that there were only a few Asian women in comics and isn't that racism. The panel moderator was also Asian, and they got to spend a lot of time crying, "There aren't that many of us out there," as though anybody but the regressive snowflakes give a damn. But here's where I'm going to start disassembling all this regressive nonsense, because when you actually get down to looking at the facts and figures, it all falls apart. Okay, let's start with Kat Staggs' problem of only having 2 books with 2 mommies. Now, I have no idea how many books her daughter has, so let's make this as favorable to her as possible and say she has 100 books. Now, I know that I, as a child, never had that many books when I was young, but let's go with it for the sake of argument. Now, if you look at every poll out there, be it Gallup or the one that I'm going to use here, the National Health Interview Survey conducted in 2013, 1.6% of Americans identified as gay or lesbian, and 0.7% identified as bisexual. So let's combine those for a moment, giving us 2.3% of Americans not being heterosexual. And that's fine. I've got no problem with that whatsoever. But if we accept that 2.3% of women identify as gay, which is actually higher than the actual numbers, but I'm trying to be charitable here, then 2 out of 100 books in her daughter's library is pretty damn representative of reality. But Kat doesn't want to be represented. She wants to be overrepresented. She wants to feel like her identity, whatever that might be, is more important than it actually is. And the same is true of Nidhi's brown people comment, that she wants Indians to be better represented in American culture, comic books, etc. But as of 2015, only 2.4 million Indians lived in America, which is less than 1.4% of the overall population. That means that if you want accurate representation for every 100 comic books or 100 TV show characters or 100 movie actors, you should expect to see just over 1 Indian actor or character or whatever. And according to Ranker.com, there are tons of them. So my question is, where's the problem? And we can do the same thing with Muslims, which according to a recent Pew Research study in 2016, constitute 3.3% of the population. That means that you should see just over 3 Muslim characters or actors or whatever out of every 100 characters or actors on TV or in movies. Is that what we see? Of course not. We see more, and we see people like this trying to push for more and more and more. They don't want realistic representation. They want over-representation. And just for the hell of it, since I brought it up, let's look at the Asians. It's a harder question to quantify because what constitutes Asian is kind of vague, but according to Wikipedia, about 5.6% of the total American population are Asian. Okay, do we see 5.6% of stories told in comic books or movies or whatever containing Asian characters? Yeah, I'd say so. But clearly there's an agenda here to push for more. If there was some white writer or artist sitting up there on a stage saying we needed to have more representation for white characters, these people would have a heart attack. They'd be screaming racism at the top of their lungs. But they're totally blinded to their own racism and sexism and other identitarian political nonsense. I mean, I personally couldn't care less about somebody's skin color. Not at all. And people say, well, you're white, you don't have to. No, nobody has to. And anyone who does, be it the idiots on the far right or the idiots on the far left, all of those people are racists. It's part of the definition of the word. According to the dictionary, racism is the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. And that's absolutely true of most of these people. They want to push their own particular racial identitarian agenda because they feel they're not getting the kind of attention they deserve. But my question is, why should they get any attention based on the color of their skin or sexual preference or any of those other physical factors alone? Because these people identify as race first and individual characteristics a far second. And that Indian mother who came up to Nidhi Janani wondering how her daughter could get into a field of interest, the answer isn't try harder because you're Indian. It's try harder and earn it. Because whether these snowflakes like it or not, we live in a meritocracy. And I know that terrifies the far political left who think they ought to just get things for waking up in the morning. But that's not how things work in the real world. You have to earn your place through the sweat of your own brow. You don't get things because of the color of your skin. Affirmative action is racist through and through. It's really telling people that you're too stupid and useless on your own, so you need special treatment and lower standards to get to the same place. This is what the regressive left is telling people. You're not good enough to do it on your own. It wasn't that long ago that Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character." But that's not the world we live in, and most of that is coming straight from the regressive left. King would be embarrassed by how the people who used to be on his side have corrupted the debate in America. King wanted a colorblind America. Modern regressives put a magnifying glass on race and make everything worse. They are only concerned with gender and race and sexual orientation, not with the content of anyone's character, except to call anyone who disagrees with them names. I have no idea how they can't see this, but as we all know, they're operating on emotion, not intellect. They're not thinking about the things coming out of their mouths. They don't care to do some simple research to see if the things they're demanding make any sense. They just want more and more and more so they can feel better about themselves. They don't want to earn their place like everyone else and compete against the best. They want to be given the front of the line because of things that they have no control over, because it's easier and more emotionally comforting than having to secure their position through hard work. And I wish I could say this was the only example of this, but it isn't. This is just one of many, many, many examples of regressive racism and sexism and discrimination against the successful by people who don't want to put in the effort and time to achieve success on their own. And really, so long as this mentality exists, I think most people will assume, rightfully or not, that minorities and women and gays didn't really achieve things through the sweat of their brow, but through legal and social maneuvering. And that's unfair to everyone. The people who were good enough and just so happened to fit into these categories, as well as the people who were better than the winners. They just had the wrong skin color and gender identity. This cannot be allowed to continue, and we as a people and as a culture need to tell these idiot regressives and their racist ideas what the hell to go do with themselves. We ought to be better than this. We are better than this. We just have to stand up for reality and rationality and shut these racist, sexist bigots down.